Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, I'm Bob Gorley. I'm part of the AFCEA Intelligence Committee, and so one of the moderators of the session today. And I'm the moderator of this panel on rebooting cyber. What did we mean by rebooting cyber for the intelligence community? What we meant by rebooting cyber is, what can we do differently? What can we do differently as big institutions in the intelligence community? What can we do differently as individuals? What can you do differently when you wake up tomorrow? If you're in need of a cyber reboot, I hope this is the place for you. How do you know what to do differently? Well, we have asked some of my cyber heroes to come and talk about this issue of rebooting cyber from various perspectives. I'll briefly introduce our panelists and we will talk about their background. I wanted to say first off that each have a wealth of experience. Each are in positions today where they are practitioners really moving us forward in this field. And I have about 8 hard questions to ask them to get started in the dialogue. But what I would really like is questions from you guys. So once you get a feel for who they are, start writing your questions down on these note cards that are here. We're going to have them collected by some of our staff. They will bring the cards to me, and then if your question is better than the questions I've lined up, then you'll get your question asked. I want it to be about rebooting, about doing stuff differently. What can the government do differently, and what can industry and academia do differently? Now, with that, some very brief introductions. First, Jay Healy, who I have worked with since the mid-90s. I want to tell you right now, Jay is a practitioner with multiple hats, a professor at Columbia University, and he's shaping our youngest generation in cyber policy, but also a practitioner working in the White House to create this new National Cybersecurity Strategy, one of the creators of that, that was rolled out in March. So he's advised multiple presidents and administrations on strategies and has a deep background in that and can help us better understand that. A quick fact about Jay before I let him correct the record and tell you who he really is, and I would say you've heard of this concept of cyber threat intelligence. This is now a $5 billion a year market, and I consider Jay the father of cyber threat intelligence. Why? He was part of a team that built the ConOps for this thing in government, in DOD, the Joint Task Force for Computer Network Defense, the first cyber command. And he wrote in there these concepts of cyber, of intelligence. And then I got to see him in action as he took these thorny problems and made it clear that if we can understand the adversary better and can characterize the threat, we can drive operational decisions. And that's why, Jay, I consider you the father of cyber threat intelligence. But before I let you give a self-introduction, let me talk about Heather. Heather, I've known for a short while, but all my friends are always telling me about Heather and her professional expertise. And reading her bio, she's the perfect woman for this panel. Deep experience in Army intelligence and counterintelligence. Experience in the DC metro area and everything that's crazy about this place, but also overseas in the field. Legion of Merit Award. And I hear that and I immediately say, Heather, I'll follow you anywhere. You're a great leader, but also experienced at the highest levels of the intelligence community on the President's Intelligence Advisory Board. So she has seen these issues at the highest level and the tactical level, and we'll ask her lots of hard questions about that in a second. And Asma Verma is with CISA. CISA, you know, as an organization that I hope you're as proud of them as I am. They have this tough job of needing to lead cyber defense for the nation, but not being in charge of the nation's activities. So how do you do that? They're great at creating visions, bringing people along, and helping through logic and rational information sharing. And she's right in the middle of all of that. Danny McPherson is someone I want you to all know, but he does something that is really invisible to most of us. He makes this thing called the internet work. And he does it, they resolve, his company is known for managing the DNS for .com and .net and many other functions around the DNS and overall security and health of the internet. Almost 26 years, 100% uptime. This guy, I know, has some lessons for all of us to hear about security and governance and how to do things well. Lessons for the intelligence community, I'm sure. Now, ladies and gents, that was my version of who you are in your bios. I wanted to give you 2 minutes each to say, okay, who are you really and what are you doing? And what are your ideas for how we can reboot cyber? Jay?
Great, thanks, Bob. And almost all the things he said that I did, I was actually working for him. So it was like humble brag. But yeah, we were the first 2 people ever assigned to a Cyber J2 back in 1998. And so my perspective, I've done that. I was set up the first CERT capability at Goldman Sachs, vice chairman of the FSI SAC. So I've been able to bring a lot of this capability together. I wrote the very first history book of cyber conflict. And what really struck me on this theme of rebooting is some of the stuff that I picked up researching that history book. For example, quotes saying that the red team always gets through. Quotes that say we can't add security by retrofit, right? Meaning we have to build it, bake it in, not build it on afterwards. Those quotes come from 1972. Right? So we've been at this and we have the basic ideas of what we've needed for 50 freaking years. And yet we're still having the same problems. And so that's where I base most of my ideas and the things that went into the National Cybersecurity Strategy. What can we do to get defense better than offense at the greatest scale and least cost?
Great. Heather?
Well said. I'm Heather McMahon, and currently I'm the Deputy Executive Director at the Applied Research Lab for Intelligence and Security at the University of Maryland, known as ARLIS. It's the newest of the DoD's university-affiliated research centers, and what we do there and why it's relevant to now is that we do research and quality engineering for the defense, intelligence, and security communities in the domains of human understanding, language, cognition, culture. How do people work? How does the wetware work? And how do machines work? How do computers work? And all of the problem sets that we work on are related to sense-making, decision-making, and risk management, which of course includes insider risk and supply chain risk, as well as other things. And then how to grow the trusted workforce so that our country and allies have the workforce that is able to tackle these challenges for today and tomorrow. I come to this position, I'm not an academic, but I've been a practitioner of counterintelligence and other things around the world over the last 3 decades. And wow, that hurts to say that. Anyway, and what we need now is we need quality research, technical understanding to bring all these worlds together. The socio-technical challenges are within our grasp to solve, and it's a lot of those challenges that you mentioned that we know what we've needed to do since the 70s, and we're still talking about doing it. The time is now to get there, and the opportunities are much different now, and I think greater for us as well as the risks. So that would be my ad, that we need to actually get into rethinking some of the things that we've built and how to nudge them into better performance. And I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks.
University of Maryland. That's my alma mater.
Yeah.
I loved it so much I graduated twice.
All right, we're going to get you over there. Yeah.
My name is Asta Verma. Real easy way to remember my name, because it's hard to pronounce. Call me that, it's okay. I've been called my whole life. Quite fine. The problem is it's a fractured landscape. Always has been. A fractured landscape got created 50 years ago. Because back then, we didn't anticipate hackers. We live in a world that's quite fractured. I like to call it the wild, wild west. It kind of is. Every day we add a new layer to the wild, wild west, whether it's a set of things or the explosion of web apps. Also meant a rise in things like ransomware. What was interesting about the last 3 years is that it wasn't just to the big firms. It was happening at the top level. And it was going after sectors that were particularly vulnerable. What happened during COVID? The healthcare sector got attacked. Who had the biggest surge of all of our sectors? Healthcare, which has the meatiest records and data out there. Apparently my voice doesn't project. So now you all can hear me. The point is, it was a very target-rich, cyber-poor environment. That's what they like to say, right? So Wherever that fractured environment exists, we need to find a way to solve that problem, except it's a myriad of problems, not just one. It's a problem at the user behavior level. People need to be better aware. It's also a problem at the systems level. Back to the point of origin of where software got built, systems got built. You think about SolarWinds and how that happened, right? That's what led to sudden urgency around SBOM and secure by design, secure by default. Those things became mainstream in our vernacular because of those incidents. Now you can open up a newspaper, you'll see a full-page ad by Google, and it's about cyber. And who is it intended for? Not for the techies. It's intended for the human audience because it's affecting you in your daily lives. So CISA has a role to play in that. We can talk much more about it. One of the key principles is data sharing. How do we make the data we are collecting work for us better? So happy to talk about that some more.
Great. One other thing, Asta, and that is I failed to mention in your bio that you have extensive experience both in government and industry. You've worked at places like, who's Ellen Hamilton as a chief product officer? Salesforce as strategy. So you know the industry piece of this
I did not
too.
come from government. I was a late recruit into government. That's interesting for mid-career folks like me, right? Spent your entire life making a juicy paycheck in industry. Why would you be motivated to come work for the government? I can tell you. You can come talk to me afterwards. I'll be really happy to tell you why.
Awesome. Danny?
Yeah, so Danny McPherson of VeriSign sorry, excuse me, I was going to leave with something else. So VeriSign operates a lot of critical internet infrastructure. Your phone, your laptop, IoT device have a little piece of software on there, and when it navigates somewhere on the internet or it tries to rendezvous with a control server or something to that effect, then it reaches out to our infrastructure and says, hey, where's this at today, right? And so we've been operating that infrastructure. We've got nodes all over the world, 220 plus locations. Do a lot of work with internet standards and internet infrastructure security. So a lot on the routing system, border gateway protocol, next generation security protocols for both the routing system and the domain name system. And we spend a lot of time trying to understand and enumerate systemic dependencies, how things fail, where they fail, how we respond to those so that we can preserve the availability and integrity of our services. I've been doing that, as Bob mentioned, going on 26 years of 100% uptime and uninterrupted availability for that infrastructure. And that's in the face of a lot of upgrades. We've added some security extensions to all these things. There's been lots of different shifts in the ecosystem, right? We like this multi-stakeholder approach to internet, to internet governance and and standards development and so forth. Not any kind of multilateral approach, if you will. And spent a lot of time in the internet standards organizations working on those things. We're also a public company, publicly traded company, multi-regulated. So we have a lot of I think we have a good governance and oversight model for cyber. I think Bob may have some questions on that later that we may get into, but I'll stop there for now.
Okay, great. So I do have a lot of questions for them. I want to give you a feel for what they are, but first I have two questions for you. Is there somebody here from Virtualytics? Because, if so, I wanted to point you out, because Virtualytics is the kind sponsor. There he is, right there. So thanks for sponsoring us today. We really appreciate this breakout. Appreciate it. So I also have another question for all of you, a quick survey so we can understand the audience here. I want to, if you raise your hand if this applies to you, our older generation is under a cyber attack by technology-enabled fraud. I want you to raise your hand if your mom or dad or aunt or uncle or anyone you know who's 70 or older has been the victim of a technology-enabled cyber crime. Okay, that is the majority. For those of you who haven't raised your hand yet, there's a good chance that your elder relatives are a victim, but they don't know it yet and you don't know it yet. This is a serious issue, and it's one of the questions I was going to ask later in our conversation, but maybe I want to ask it earlier. And Ken Westbrook, are you here somewhere? There's Ken right there. I also want you to track down Ken after this and talk to him about initiatives to really make this a little bit better. So let me move this up the kind of question stack and ask it earlier. You know, the intelligence community writes an annual threat assessment every year, and they do a really good job articulating the threat from a broad range of actors, including cyber, and they also talk about international crime. So if you're part of the intel community, thanks for writing this stuff. The intel community does have a role in fighting and mitigating these horrors of international crime. And maybe it should be playing a bigger role in this technology-enabled elder fraud actions, because these criminals are stealing the retirement income, the entire retirement savings in some cases, of our older generation. And I think there's things that the intel community can do to help the nation struggle and mitigate this. Jay, you wrote the cyber strategy. What do you think of this?
It's one of the key parts of the National Cybersecurity Strategy, which came out in March. The implementation plan just came out yesterday. We might dive back into that. Oh, and by the way, I'm speaking only in my Columbia hat right now as a Columbia senior research scholar, not in any other capacity. And the National Cybersecurity Strategy had one bit that's really important to I think everything, but also to this, in saying that for too long we've put the burden on the endpoints, on the users, on the mom and pop businesses, on the retirees to get security right. Right? We're giving them this unsecurable technology and say it's up to you to figure out how to make this work. I've been in the business 25 years. I'm not sure that I'm doing things as securely as I ought to. It's just too complex. And so what the first shift that the U.S. National Cybersecurity Strategy talked about, and this was really important to the Office of the National Cyber Director, was to shift that burden back to those who can bear it the most. So take that responsibility, shift as much responsibility away from the endpoints of the retirees, us, the mom and pops, the companies, to those that can bear that burden. That's the U.S. government first and foremost. What can the government do? And I think Intel fits into that. But also, like, can we have software liability liability for software manufacturers? What can the larger companies do to make sure that we're doing this? And this is where you're seeing with CISA, with secure by default, secure by design, right? If we're getting secure by default, secure by design products, then it's a lot harder at the endpoints or it's a lot easier for the people to secure things, and hopefully we'll see less on the edge.
Awesome, thanks. Heather, ideas on this?
Absolutely. I mean, when you mentioned it, CISA is right in the middle of that, right? And one of my colleagues back home at CISA, Mr. Bob Lord, draws a lot of parallels between cyber today and the car industry. You know, it wasn't always that we had seatbelts. It wasn't always that we had airbags. And the awareness was created, ironically enough, when those crash test dummy videos went out. People saw the horrors for themselves. And by witnessing the horrors that occurred, people were shifted. And car companies were shifted. Suddenly safety became sexy instead of aerodynamics. And so now we look for those safety credentials when we buy cars because we want to be protected. We should be doing something similar in the cyber landscape. You know, we don't have an NTSB in cyber, not exactly, and we don't have a way to motivate these industries to do more or these software providers to do more, and yet we should. So if we look at another parallel industry for clues, there are ways in which we can do this.
All right, cool. Heather, comments on this?
Yeah, I'll add, from the socio-technical perspective that the lab would take, I mean, this is a classic socio-technical problem. There's a technology component, and there's, the human behavior component, and throwing in the counterintelligence lens on top of this, it's been well reported that foreign intelligence services, benefit from fraud, crypto fraud and various other counterfeiting, activities. So from the counterintelligence perspective, there very may well be a counterintelligence, a foreign intelligence nexus, in addition to bring in the fact that various groups, all of us are targets for mis- and disinformation campaigns, which are leveraged by adversaries. And even we saw over COVID that there were different messages going out to different population groups from the various threats. And in particular, since we're talking about the older folks, like there were specific messages from China that were sent to make that portion of the population feel that they should not take, the vaccine, or that, that they were somehow being disadvantaged. And you combine that with that population being a very, very reliable voting bloc, they go to the polls. That makes them a very fruitful target for adversaries to disrupt. And when you think about it, that's, one, it's really horrible because they're just trying to make people feel worse. And those folks are at a time in their life where they should be feeling better.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of public, interest benefit in helping resolve that.
Back to they are target rich and cyber poor in their understanding and in their practices.
Yeah. Danny, do you have questions or analogies or frameworks we can think about this?
No, I think there's a lot going on in the internet abuse area from a governance contractual framework perspective. For example, ICANN, who's one of the regulators of some of the names and numbers on the internet, is doing some work with contracted parties to regulate their requirements to respond to abuse complaints and not just play whack-a-mole, right, and to hold people more accountable for bad behaviors or pockets of bad behaviors on the internet. One of the big problems, of course, is that you take down the average lifetime of a phishing site on the internet may be 2 hours, but the minute you take it down, it pops up under a new domain name or in a different country, or you take it out of the namespace, but nobody dealt with the web server, so it's still there, and they register a new name in 5 minutes, and it's back up and online, right? And so the sort of global nature of that. So making sure you deal with it systemically and as surgically as possible at the most precise point that's going to have the most effect on the miscreant and raise the bar for them is one of the most effective ways to deal with that. And there's a lot going on in the internet abuse ecosystem with the anti-phishing working group and MAW, which is mobile messaging and malware anti-abuse working group, and then the contractual controls that at least for the contracted parties, but a lot of malicious behavior also occurs in areas that aren't regulated, like a country level, top level domain, like a .in or take your pick, right? And so it's really easy to move something, and users on the internet aren't aware of that, and so it's really problematic.
Can I get a second bite at that
Yeah,
real quick?
yeah.
Because this kind of inspired me. Because it reminded me of ransomware, right? You had a lot of hard-nosed cybersecurity professionals and national security professionals, and they cared about APT groups, these advanced persistent threats. And anything else, a denial of service attack, ransomware, and the rest, why are we even talking about that? That's not the super cool ninja stuff that we need to be worried about, right? They were attracted and were predominantly worried about what the really, really high-end sophisticated groups were doing, because that was the cool stuff, especially if they were in a particularly sophisticated defense or intelligence shop themselves. And I won't say we missed, but we didn't pay enough attention to ransomware as a national security threat until Colonial Pipeline. And then all of a sudden we had a lot of chase. And by the way, I saw this in academia too, where a lot of international relations scholars would make these great data sets to understand what was happening in cyber, and they would leave out everything about ransomware or everything about cybercrime. So they're leaving out like 98% of the activity that's actually happening to just focusing on the state behavior. Then Colonial Pipeline comes around, and a lot of people, and I suspect in the intelligence community, were like, wow, this is a real national security threat. So fraud we can take as one of those, right? So as intelligence professionals, as part of this theme of reboot, is also saying, okay, what are these different things that right now, it might not feel like it's a national security threat the way that we thought about it in the Cold War or post-Cold War. But now we might have to start thinking about the other things, including them in the annual threat assessment, or start including them in PDB or in other areas.
I think that's a good action item for the Intel community, frankly. Now, I want to keep moving because we have so many topics to hit, and I also want to remind you to please keep sending your questions in. And I would also say that legible, easy-to-read questions have a greater chance of being asked. But one of the questions that I have is, what can commercial organizations do better to articulate requirements to the government? Is that a fair question?
So CIS is in a very unique position. As an agency, we have public-private partnership, but it's voluntary, right? We are on the civilian side. We are not on the defense side. That makes a lot of companies nervous, frankly. The idea of sharing their information with an agency is a scary prospect. So there's a lot of trust building that we have to do. And it's not exactly a mandate that we have, because CISA really doesn't have a big stick. I mean, we have somewhat of a big stick in the FCEB, which is the Federal Civilian Executive Branch agencies. We have participation, but it's mostly on the industry side by volunteerism. So I think our ability to reach and create those industry partnerships is going to be key. And I'm fortunate to say one of the efforts that I'm associated with on behalf of the agency is designed exactly for that. It is a joint collaborative environment. It is designed to help share data and analytics, not just with other agencies, and not just across civilian defense agencies, but also with the private sector. some of whom do participate on the Intel side. So it's not as if industry isn't participating, it's just that sometimes those highways are not well connected. So part of this project's goal, the Joint Collaborative Environment, is to improve that ecosystem at large. How do we get information, share that information in a meaningful way? And for us at CISA, it is very interesting in particular because it's not just the private industry as we know it at large from the things we consume, it's also the critical infrastructure sector. Places where you're going for your basic utilities, like your Colonial Pipeline is a great example, it's a pipeline, right? So when that goes down, it affects millions. When you have something go down in the critical infrastructure sector, it affects a large swath of population, not just an individual. So again, we have to work with industry, we have to work with those sectors.
Right. Jay, any comments on?
I want to hear from Dan. I mean, I don't know if Danny was going to.
No, I mean, we participate in several information sharing initiatives with CISA today. And, we're in an information assurance only role, right? We're a global infrastructure. We don't do anything on the Intel side per se, but we have leveraged the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act to share information. The one thing we don't hear back as often as we like if something was useful, but we do see artifacts of that, but that's fine with us, right? It's like, hey, here's something that you really need to know about this. And so we do that. I think the vulnerability scanning stuff, we obviously as a responsible enterprise, we have some bespoke capabilities, do vulnerability scanning. We buy commercial vulnerability scanning services. CISA just launched something not long ago, a vulnerability scanning if you're in a critical infrastructure sector. We participate in that. We have our bug bounty program, right? We'll listen to anyone that wants to tell us something and hopefully react. They have a ransomware.
There's a series of programs.
The new ransomware program you guys launched, and a number of other things. But the feedback loop was a big one, and for private sector, it's like it's a black hole, and we don't hear anything back, and there are lots of constraints when you do share something, about the efficacy of that. And so, by and large, I think they're doing much better. Some may say less bad, I would say.
Yeah, I'm really interested if we can get key private sector institutions, not all of them, key ones, to be seen as more legitimate, full customers through the entire intelligence cycle. Because I had two really formative events, right? When I was working for then Commander Gorley, it was Captain Healy, 03 Captain Healy, not 06 Captain Healy. And at this very first Cyber J2, you didn't even have Cyber J2s before this. Bob set up the first. And even as an 03 there, I had this incredible ability to drive collection, to help the DoD understand who might be attacking us through cyberspace next, to submit requirements for additional analysis. Right? I really felt like our team of maybe 5 had this great ability to do that. I then went on, set up Goldman Sachs' first incident response team. I was the vice chairman of the FSI SAC and setting up their threat and intelligence group. So for the first time, we could use these intelligence sources and methods to think about who would be coming at the U.S. finance sector, not to attack us, but to try and take down the United States. And I then had zero access to do any of that as the vice chairman of the FSI SAC. So I'm not saying that we need to be treating the private sector just like they're a ranger battalion or like their regional command, but like it shouldn't be nothing. Or just the butt end of, okay, we'll give them some tearline reporting. What are the requirements that are coming at us? Some of the sectors that are especially well organized, electricity, finance, there's a structure for this where we could say. Also, if this, on the operational side, what's the call for fires, right? If we knew the financial sector was going to go down today, and it was going to be $1 trillion loss and it was going to be down for 2 weeks, unless we take these cyber targets down, how would that work, right? We know how it would work if it was a military organization. So we know the adversaries are attacking the private sector to affect the United States, but we're not including them in the rest of that. So fortunately, the implementation plan for the National Cybersecurity Strategy has 2 actions that come out on this and are going to continue to chip away at that. Last couple of administrations have started on that, and I'm glad to see that this administration is picking that up in two separate implementation actions.
Awesome. So let me just say one action for all of us should be to read the strategy if you haven't yet. It came out in March. Read it slowly, moving your lips. Read the implementation plan, because this is the first that I've seen that's actually a published implementation plan. A lot of it is focused on federal government actions, but if you are in industry and want to know how you can help, read the implementation plan.
Go ahead, we'll wait.
Yeah. And I have a lot of other questions, some really good ones. Somebody wants to know something about the Microsoft Beach, and I'm wondering where the Microsoft Beach is, but I'll ask that in a minute. First, Heather.
Breach.
Breach. Okay. Must be.
He's in summer
What's on
mode.
your
You
mind,
can
Bob?
tell, right?
You know where I want to be.
Pina coladas.
Don't worry about that beach.
Before getting into that, I wanted to ask Heather about counterintelligence and the role of counterintelligence in cyber. I want to tell you who all is talking about counterintelligence in cyber. Nobody, it seems like. There's a National Counterintelligence Security Executive. They publish stuff. They publish good reports yearly. I might be the only one that read them, but they publish stuff about the threat of counterintelligence in cyber. And it doesn't seem really operationalized, the role of counterintelligence in cyber. And I wanted to ask your thoughts, Heather, on is there a role for counterintelligence in operational cyber defense?
Oh, absolutely. And, as we've discussed, I'm happy for this question because
Thank you.
counterintelligence and cybersecurity have actually been together since, the birth of cybersecurity. And it would have been longer, but, the computers weren't around. And that's really increased over the years. I mean, we know that, counterintelligence is all those things that we do to identify, analyze, respond, or mitigate, or disrupt how an adversary may collect against us, right? And now that every single human endpoint has loaded themselves down with a smartphone that has radios and instant connectivity and social media and the internet of everything that we put on our bodies and in our lives, that's increased the attack surface. And so it's interesting that you say, like, no one ever talks about counterintelligence, and yet yesterday, Senators Rubio and Warner were talking counterintelligence. Yep. And not only were they articulately and passionately and correctly speaking about it, but I mean, they were right about everything they said. And what's remarkable to me as a practitioner, 15 years ago, we were noticing, oh my goodness, why are all these Chinese businessmen, bothering our service members? Why are they hitting up our defense contractors? What is this happening? And at that time, on high would say, hey, those are just business people. Those aren't, known intelligence officers, so stop wasting your time, field. Well, forward to now, and wow, this is how intellectual property theft was happening, right? Their system doesn't look like our system, and our, well-meaning but perhaps overweening attendance to our rules and boundaries and norms, caused us to potentially not notice that as early as we have. And even as early as as late as 2015, you were unpopular, I know, because I was unpopular for saying in the Pentagon that, hey, the supply chain with China integrated into a lot of our weapon systems is a problem that we need to work on. And at that time, our elected representatives, most of them could not really speak nor have the time to understand either cybersecurity or counterintelligence. And now I see that balance really, really tipping. And Senators Rubio and Warner are great positive examples of that. There's others I can mention, like this kind of bipartisan elevated thought is happening around the things that really matter to people. And so I would say, I think we've discussed before, counterintelligence people, we don't like people to know what we're doing. That's kind of inherent in the breed. But more and more that is changing because the attack surface is, between every set of human ears. It's integrated in our supply chains of our life, in the social media platforms we choose to use, the messages we might get and how we respond to them. And now the response, I think in the past, we've been able to be, silent and private about, what kind of solutions we would put in and what kind of information we could share. But now the balance is tipped to the defense, and the defense is a large part of the defense is to inform everyone about the risks and benefits, that the fact that adversaries are trying to change how you feel, and just knowing those sort of things can help you build sales resistance to those kind of things, and also help industry understand that we need to have, security by design. We need to be working on these things together and upfront from the very beginning. And I'm sorry, I'm passionate about that. I can keep talking about counterintelligence all day.
No, that's why you're here, really.
All right.
This is important for all of us, and I think it definitely needs a reboot. There needs to be more attention on counterintelligence, in my opinion, and there needs to be more direct contact between the counterintelligence investigations and the cyber defenders to feed them information they need.
Well, yeah, and let me, a couple of things about that. Sorry, I'm stealing the time. But to the counterintelligence professionals in the world, there are so many important things and competitions for your time. One of the things you need to add to your deck, if you haven't already, is you got to understand technology and you need to understand business, because that's where the risks and opportunities are, and those are the people in those worlds that you need to communicate with in order to know how to communicate effectively, really understand what might be happening in a given situation. And given that we can't all be technical experts on everything, you need to have that baseline understanding and also have built your network so that you can go ask an expert, and you are a part of the interconnected community, and that will not change. You will never be out of a job. AI is not putting you out of a job. You should get some AI and it will help you do your job more effectively. But yeah,
Right.
You're in a great field.
All right, let me keep rolling here because I want to ask Danny a question about governance. Cybersecurity governance is big in corporate America, at least it should be everywhere, but there's now some government nudges on industry. One, the National Security Strategy that came out in March, that's important and informative for any commercial entity, but the SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission, that regulates publicly traded corporations, now has a rule that they have they've been sharing around for over a year. It will be finalized in October, and that rule says any publicly traded corporation that has a board of directors, you must tell us who your cyber guy is on that board. And additionally, they give requirements for if there's a breach, you must do the following. And there's a big nudge towards standing up like a cyber committee or something that helps the board understand what is happening in the corporation. A lot of corporations are scrambling on, oh no, what do we do about this now? But I look at VeriSign, and you guys have been doing this for like 9 years. And so I wanted to ask if you have lessons for us from your corporate governance on what other corporations should do to have better cybersecurity governance, or other government entities.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of governance. On one hand, I used to not like the governance that got in the way, right? But I find that it gives me leverage anytime I need something now, because if you say, hey, we need to do this, or we can't mitigate this risk, it's going to be a problem. And it's about getting the right visibility at the right levels of the organization. I'm chief security officer there, but I also own the CIO, CTO, all the platform engineering teams roll up to me in that capacity. But we have a safety and security council inside of our company that our CEO, Jim Bidzos, chairs. And some of you may know his name from RSA and another place. He's certainly been in cyber for a long time. He's an expert himself. But we have an independent board director that's a liaison to our Safety and Security Council. And any significant incident, even if it's not a material incident that we would disclose publicly, an operational issue, our strategies, plans, technology roadmaps, other things are all disclosed there. Our security awareness training, our life safety and people safety stuff, that kind of thing is there as well. And then at the board level, we actually have a cyber security committee that the independent board liaison chairs, or the independent board member chairs, the one that sits on the cybersecurity committee, and we meet quarterly there, and there's fixed agenda, a lot of visibility to that, and then I brief the board on a quarterly basis, as does the chair of the cybersecurity committee. And so we have a lot of things codified about disclosure and our obligations inside the company and at the board level, and certainly our obligations as a public company, but to anyone we have contractual obligations with as well for any cyber incident. And so we've spent a lot of time on that. And quite frankly, it's like I didn't like a lot of this oversight at first, but now anytime I need to do anything, I've got the right visibility and the right leverage, and we get it done, right? It's like, here's the right thing to do. We want to be on the right side of history. If and when something happens, right, we want to say we were doing everything we were contractually and regulatorily obligated to do, and also aim for what good looks like with, CIS controls and this cybersecurity framework. What's good look like for what we do in our environment, because when something occurs, we don't want to be in hindsight. One of the board members actually asked, said, are we spending enough on cyber? I was like, when something happens, you never spend enough, right? And so there's not going to be any excuse there. And so I think we've got a pretty good model. If you're interested in seeing that, you could, we talk about it in our proxy statement you can find on our website, and there's some dialogue on the structure and what we've been doing there for a while. So I think it's pretty effective and the right level of oversight for a publicly traded company. Now, if we weren't publicly traded, we would probably still have the same model, but I think it was Jay or maybe it was Asta the other day that talked about it's the smaller companies when you go further down, and they don't have these external oversight obligations, but they still have a lot of consumers that are relying upon them. How do you sort of find a model that scales in those environments? So maybe I'll take it over to you.
At the end of the day, it's all the same technology stack that we're using, whether it's private or it's government. It's the same technology stack. So you want to get ahead and be proactive to the risk instead of being reactive to the risk. Right? One pivot CISA has made and is making is not just being a risk advisor anymore. We want to be a risk reducer, which means it's a much more action-oriented role for us to play. Right? We're looking to make a measurable difference, which means whatever you put out has to make a measurable difference. And I think it begins with understanding the tech stack, understanding where and how our tools and services and the platforms we use interact with that tech stack, and forcing that problem back to the point of origin, not at the point of consumption. Because you can't, our population is always going to age. It's always going to grow. You can solve some of these problems back at the origin if you create the right energy to infuse it from the ground up.
Let me keep moving. I got some great questions here. We have far too many questions to answer, but keep them coming, because I'm going to keep all these and I will write about them or inform you guys what the questions are. A couple questions dealt with the dynamic between offense and defense. And I know, Jay, you've thought about this for a long time, so I wanted to ask you to tell us your views about the dynamic between offense and defense. Is it always going to be true that the offense always wins?
I hope not, and it's what my writing has been about, is where can we improve what have been the technology, operational and policy innovations that have improved, that have given the greatest defense over advantage at the largest scale and least cost. It tends not to be technology inside the enterprise, right? Most of the investment, if you walk the floor at RSA, one of the other conferences, goes towards technology inside the enterprise. Passwords, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, XDR, the whole series. That tends not to work that well, or it doesn't scale, right? If we invented a perfect widget that would block all cyber attacks, we would still have to buy 10 million of them, deploy them, integrate them to the environment, keep them updated, train people on how to use them, right? It's still a lot of complexity. The innovations that have tended to give us the most defense over offense at the largest scale and least cost were things like Windows Update, end-to-end encryption, where the person that's in, or the organization that's in the position to make the change then helps a billion at once, rather than forcing a billion to go and buy a device or not click on a link. Right? That's part of that shifting that you see in the National Cybersecurity Strategy. So I'm hopeful. Like cloud is certainly helping bring us to that end encryption. There's a few others. But this is a long-running problem. There's someone I want to talk about. Well, two people. Just a quick show of hands. I expect a lot of hands to go on this first one. Who's heard of Grace Hopper? Admiral Grace Hopper. Great. How many people have heard of Hilda Matthew? Hilda Matthew in this crowd needs to get more hands, or some hands. Hilda Matthew was a woman engineer out of NSA in the 1960s who first realized that these new computer networks were going to be both an amazing intelligence collection opportunity. Wow, what a juicy target. But also were going to be a really serious risk to the Department of Defense in the United States, and that we had to protect them. Remember that 1972 report? She was one of the authors of that report. It was going to Air Force Systems Command. Think about how lonely that must have been to be the lone woman in that room. There are only about 8 authors of that report. So she was a real intelligence hero. NSA put her into the NSA Hall of Fame. We should know more about this intelligence hero. And you can't make this up. The person who first realized that the intelligence community of the United States was going to be caught between the offensive opportunities to our enemies but also be perhaps existentially vulnerable in the same way. Before she was married, her name was Hilda Faust. It's the original Faustian bargain of intelligence and cyber. I mean, you can't make that up, right? So we're well into this, right? The person who first had the idea at NSA realized we were going to have this offense-defense trade-off. And it's still with us 70 years on, 60 years on.
3 questions deal in some way or another with trusted information sharing. And how do you avoid conflicts of interest? How do you rapidly share information inside the Intel community? How do you rapidly share information outside the Intel community? And then these also talked about the Microsoft reach.
I can talk about the first one.
Okay.
So I mentioned the lead effort one of the lead efforts within CISA is something called the Joint Collaborative Environment. I like to call it the Joint Collaborative Ecosystem, because really parts of the ecosystem exists already. Part of it is us trying to build it. But what it is, as I described it before, a set of highways. A set of highways that allows data to get from point of ingest into a developed product. Usually that's an analytic when it comes to data and data analysis. What that analytic does is it gets applied to a data set and it creates insights, effectively knowledge, or something that is worthy of being shared. Then the question becomes, how do you share it back out? The world of data, you would think it'd be really simple. You bring the data in, you analyze it, and you send it back out to the audience that needs to see it. In actuality, it's much more complicated than that. Because of our authorities, our agencies are designed to have certain authorities over certain data. We can't all be in each other's business. And those segmentation exists for a reason, and very good reasons. That's one way we protect our data from falling into the wrong hands, even if it means protecting it from other agencies. For CISA, on the civilian side, we're fiercely protective of the data that we have, especially when we're working with voluntary partnerships on the industry side. So we have a whole series of legalese that we have to work with, whether they're logical access agreements or you're making data available to certain communities of interest. There are mechanisms in place, lax and coys if you live in this world, that really control the dissemination of information. And really what CISA is trying to do is take our data that we collect through vulnerability scans and the various different services we offer. We want to enrich it. We want to enrich it with data that other agencies are collecting. Maybe Intel agencies are collecting. We want to correlate exactly as you said. What Intel information can we correlate back down to our cyber data? What can we generate meaningful insights from? And then who can and how can we share it back out to the audience, whether it's agencies or industry or Five Eye or internet, whoever it is. That's what the Joint Collaborative Environment Ecosystem is all about, figuring that out, making it work and making it work effectively so that we're not experiencing unnecessary delays when things like SolarWinds happens. We've got those highways built.
And was that JCE, that was mentioned in the Solarium report as a desired thing, was that then put in law and funded?
It is an effort. It takes a lot to get something lawed and funded in our world. Let's just be real about that. But that doesn't mean the need isn't there, right? So CISA saw and read the report. We understood the fractured environment problem, and we're tackling it. And we're working that in coalition and in partnership with other agencies. And if Congress wants to make it a funded law, that's great. But we're doing it in the meantime anyways.
Awesome. We did have another kind of a related question for you, and that was, it essentially said that all these things in the National Security Strategy that CISA has to do, it looks like you're getting a lot of unfunded requirements that you're going to have to move out on, and how are you going to deal with that?
I think that creates demand, right? There's an urgency there, and when there's a need and there's urgency and there's data to support it, things happen. So that's one of the reasons why we're not letting those kinds of natural movements affect us and our desire to try to get this coalition built and to get this problem solved. So we're hoping that this only just exemplifies the need for those things, so that Congress and really those of us that have a voting choice are making the right choices when it comes to funding those kinds of needs, because they affect all of us as a population.
Let me keep moving because we're running out of time, and I want to say that 2 questions deal with essentially education. And Jay, maybe you can help us understand this, but in the context of one of these questions, it is education at much more junior levels than you're teaching. And what can the nation do to really help educate our workforce? One of the questions called out other nations that have very well-educated workforces that understand technology and how to raise defenses. What do you think we should, as a nation, be doing differently?
Yeah, one of the action items in the National Cybersecurity Implementation Plan that came out yesterday, it looks general. It just says publish the National Cyber Workforce Strategy. That is drafted. I don't know what the timeline is. I would expect it to be in the next couple of months coming out from the Office of the National Cyber Director. Right? And we've said that we want to fix workforce, right? We've had recommendations going back to the 2000 National Plan to secure information infrastructure that said let's fix workforce. What's different this time is that within the Office of the National Cyber Director, there's an official, an Assistant National Cyber Director for workforce development. So that plan is going to be coming, that strategy is going to be coming out, and it has a team within ONCD to make sure that it's actually getting implemented. Also, ONCD has the team that I had been part of, I left in April, was not just strategy, but also budget. So all of those elements that are coming in that out of the strategy, including workforce, there is a team there run by Drennan Dudley. Some of you might have known her as a Senate appropriator, right? A Senate appropriator, she knows how the money works to make sure that those priorities are making into the president's budget. So I'm really hopeful that that workforce strategy is going to come out soon, and we have a lot better chance to actually implementing that stuff than we have beforehand because we have ONCD there.
That's good. That's good news, and I think that's reason for all of us to track that. And I wanted to go back and stay true to one of these questions because, Heather, the way the person wrote this, one question about education was, what can the school curriculums incorporate in order to increase the skill set of our future counterintelligence workforce? Is there a role there?
Trust no one.
Well,
Yeah, trust no one.
that's a great question. I think it goes back to a little bit of civics education as well, but also, history. There's a lot that is known and, can be studied about how counterintelligence has impacted us in the past. And there's a lot of current research actually on the industry side. They may use different words to describe the activities than we would, from a government perspective. But, there's a lot to know. And the young folks also will be more native than we are in understanding where is the new place where red and blue meet. Where do people encounter, foreign intelligence, or other kind of collection opportunities where does the risk enter the system? Young folks are going to reflexively know that, and they're also going to be able to build more sales resistance as they understand those mechanisms. And I have 2 children that are tween age, and I know I'm a national security professional, but my kids know the dangers of using TikTok before they even ask me if they can download an app. They research who's the owner, and I've even seen them like scheming with one another. Oh, we want this app. They do the research. Oh, ByteDance. Nope, not going to ask mom.
Yeah.
And, it's not only like my requirement. They actually understand, and they're able to explain it, to their peers. So whoever asked that question, it's a wonderful question. There's a lot of room to think about it, and I would love to think about it with anyone that cares about these topics. Please connect with the University of Maryland, with Arliss specifically. And
I'd love to learn more.
I'm sorry. A lot of it is just meeting people where they are and engaging with them with the skills they have and the interests they have. And I love how you brought that up and used that as an example. That's great. I'm sorry, Austin.
I was going to say, I want to learn more, especially because it's University of Maryland. And
there you go. Go Terps.
A lot of other questions. Keep them coming in, really. I'll keep them all, and we will. I'll do something with them. But I want to get back to Ukraine. We all know who are tracking this, that there has been a lot of cyber activities around Ukraine For 10 years, Ukraine has been working to enhance their defenses. The U.S. has been helping, NATO's been helping, others have been helping. They've been right in the fight. I think there's a lot of lessons from Ukraine we can all learn. But one thing we ought to think about strategically is, when this war is over, will that be the end of large-scale cyber conflict that we need to pay attention to? Will there ever be another cyber conflict of this size? What if there are multiple cyber conflicts of this size? Is the intel community postured to help in that kind of situation? Is commercial industry postured to help? Is industry postured to withstand the attacks from organizations if there's multiple Ukraine-size attacks going on? Anybody want to talk that?
I've got a little bit. An analogy that I like, and this came out in a book called, I think, Blue Ocean, that said for the last 80 years, basically since the end of World War II, has seen the longest period ever of fleets not attacking other fleets. Right? For the last time, so you have to go back to like the Greeks and the Persians, I mean, before you had this long period where you didn't have major fleet action between each other. And so if you were interested in war on the seas and you only looked at the last 80 years, you would insist that that's not the way war in the seas works, right? Fleets just don't fight each other. And look, I've got 8 decades of evidence that prove my case. That's what I feel like sometimes in cyber. Because people are saying, look, cyber, there are no digital Pearl Harbors. It doesn't work that way. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And I say, yep, it has been that way, but that's not necessarily the way it is. You're looking back at a time since the end of the Cold War when every category of interstate violence has dropped, right? States generally haven't invaded each other for territorial gain very much since the end of the Cold War. They haven't really been using air forces and navies in the way that we had beforehand. It's similar to the way that we look and saying, hey, fleets haven't been attacking each other. So anytime I hear someone say, oh, if cyber doesn't work that way, we don't have to work Pearl Harbors, geopolitics is back, right? States are invading each other again for territorial gain. And I think as an intelligence community, we have to be really keeping our cyber defenders to, okay, what's going to happen now? States are using every kind of weapon system now. At a lot more in a lot more dangerous and risk-seeking ways, and I think we should anticipate that cyber is going to be the same. That cyber Pearl Harbors we need to start worrying again, because we have to start worrying about Pearl Harbors again, and surprise military attacks. So to tie it to Ukraine, and this is part of the rebooting, which I'm so glad you had to reboot it, right? So is Ukraine the way that we had to respond as a community in cyber threat intelligence? Is that a one-off, right? Is that a once-in-a-generation event that we don't really have to worry about again for another generation? Or is now states invading other states and now seeing this high-end, high-tempo use of cyber capabilities now going to be the norm? That instead of once a generation, it's going to be once every 5 years. So I'm really, I think we, in the Intel community as cyber defenders, we really need to be thinking about that. Do we just have to do more cyber threat intelligence, or do we have to retool the way that we've been thinking about it to be ready for these new high-tempo operations? On the military side, we've tended to fight in small teams, right? If you're an offensive team, you tend to fight in a small team. What if the Army Cyber Brigade has to fight as a brigade rather than just a series of small teams like their cyber operators?
Great questions. I think, Heather, comments on any of
I'd
this?
like to add to what you're saying, like it's so interesting how industry impacts the war in Ukraine, as well as, consensual volunteers from around the world, applying their talents to mostly defend. I think that's interesting how multinational corporations have gotten so big that they do rival, nation-state power when it gets to doing a specific thing. That's interesting. And with the intelligence community, I think we always feel like we have the information and we'll decide who needs it, and everyone wants our information, and But certainly in cyber and a lot of other business environments, the industry has the information we need on the inside. And so I think now government is challenged to think about, how do I let that information in? Because industry, you're smart. You know a lot, and it's your domain in a lot of cases.
To me, it's all about the data. It's all about the data. It's all about how fast you can churn that data and get some useful insight out of it and inform the audience, right? The more you have participants in that ecosystem, whether they're good or bad, the more data you're going to end up with. Ultimately, we're going to end up with a data noise problem. And how do we pull out the right meaningful data out of all this data we keep adding to? And you don't have to even think much beyond your own lives to know just how much data we have sitting around in places. It's not well controlled, it's not well contained, and if we could go on that particular subject, but the point is, when you add adversaries, you're talking about adding a lot more data to the picture, and how are we going to cull all that data to get all the meaningful, rich insights out of it?
And let me say, we're near the end of our session here, and we have about 8 hours more questions in my hand. But I got a really good one that might be a good wrap-up question. If I would like to ask each of you to answer this. Someone asked, what's the biggest game changer you can tell us about? Something that can be done to really be asymmetric in what we do to improve our defenses and make it harder on adversaries. So please, if each of you, I'd like your thoughts. What is a big game changer that we can take away from this session? Jay?
Thanks. I fully embracing cloud. Right now it's still not secure. A lot of that's just because it's new. We don't now know how to do cloud securely. Cloud allows us to build on an entirely new architecture. I was shocked when I was in DC. In DC, the conversations on cloud would go, the cloud is great, but all these problems. When I got to New York, the cloud is great, and we haven't even begun to see the security benefits that we got.
Heather?
Yeah, mine is actually similar. I mean, we can't abstain from technology anymore, and certainly not in the government. We need to update our IT. We need to update, how we incorporate technology into our government working lives. Adversaries leverage all this technology freely against us. And our response can't be to abstain from those same tools that would help us get ahead. And industry does have a lot of solutions that we can collaborate with.
I would say, back to your original point, my mother can't be afraid of the word cyber.
Yeah.
And she can't want to just pull the plug from the wall because she doesn't know how to answer a pop-up question, yes or no.
Just follow the theme there. Yeah, it's like, what do I care about? Where does it live? I got more things that live in more places that is more sensitive, right? And and so how you protect those, how you understand those is certainly something everybody should think about. What's my attack surface look like, or my organizations, or my countries, right? And I think one fast fact, right? 30% of the countries in the world don't have a single authoritative name server for their top level domains, right? Inside their country. And if you just step back and think about that, right? I think we've done a good job, but I think that as things are more interconnected, then we certainly, and cloud certainly, cloud-esque capabilities and IoT and other things are certainly, driving more things to live in more places. So how do we protect that? And I think that I guess
before we hand out one of these, which is like the open risk to all of us, there should be like a 101. How do you use your cell phone safely?
Certainly that. So I do think, though, I guess if there's a game changer, I do think that in the last couple of years with some significant incidents, including Ukraine conflict, but Colonial Pipeline, take your pick, any of the big breaches, that there's more awareness among leadership and others about the risks of cyber, and so there's more investment. So be optimistic that, that we continue to invest in those areas.
If you enjoyed this, please thank the panel. Thanks all.